In 2018, Evergrande was known as the world's most valuable real estate company, and by 2023, this company had become a headache for China's economy. What exactly happened in just 6 years? Will the collapse of this real estate giant trigger a crisis similar to 2008? The main reason for the 2008 crisis was debt, the same reason as why Evergrande is in trouble. We will see how similar this Evergrande crisis is to the 2008 crisis, which brought the US economy to the brink of collapse. Similarly, will the Evergrande crisis hurt China's economy? We will see everything in detail in this video, but first, we will go into the details of why Evergrande is failing. Around the year 1996, China was going through a phase of urbanization when lots of people moved from villages to cities. This increased the demand for houses in the big Chinese cities. Hui Ka-yen, who at the time worked at a steel factory, quit his job and started Evergrande, a real estate company, in 1996. Initially, the company borrowed money from the Chinese banks and built homes for the people who were moving to the cities. With increasing demand, Evergrande built and supplied the houses. Because of this, the company quickly rose to become one of the top real estate companies in China. As the business of Evergrande grew, Mr. Hui Ka-yen was able to attract tens of billions of dollars in funding from foreign and domestic investors, and he got cheap loans from Chinese banks. The success of Evergrande also built very important political connections for Mr. Hui Ka-yen. His influence was so greatly increased among the Chinese political spectrum that he became party committee secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. This built a lot of ambition for Hui Ka-yen to make Evergrande one of the biggest companies. He used a simple formula to run Evergrande. He borrowed money to buy land. Once the land is bought, he would announce the housing project on the land. Once the project was announced, Evergrande would sell homes on that site even before they were built. Then Evergrande would use the cash acquired from selling homes to construct the houses and pay lenders. Then they would again borrow from banks to finance the next real estate project. This business model quickly made Evergrande one of the top real estate companies in China. All this was going well for Evergrande until 2009. In 2009, Evergrande came up with an IPO. As more people were lifted out of poverty, lots of people were buying homes and investing their money in real estate. This increased Evergrande's demand even more in the market. Evergrande had the ambition to expand. So, after the IPO, Evergrande began its expansion operations in the new businesses. Evergrande bought a soccer club in 2010 and spent billions of dollars on foreign players. It then moved into the dairy, grain, and oil businesses. At one point, it even tried pig farming and electric vehicle manufacturing. The company kept borrowing from banks to run the operations of the new businesses it entered. Evergrande was considered such a valuable company that, in the year 2018, Mr. Hui Ka-yen was known as one of the richest men in Asia. This borrowing and expansion approach was going well until the year 2020. The things that happened in the year 2020 began the disaster of Evergrande. China is one of the top economies in the world, and around 35% of China's GDP is tied to its real estate sector. To build this infrastructure, real estate companies used huge borrowings from Chinese banks. Because of this, China's property sector witnessed a period of rapid expansion, backed by easy access to loans. As the debt was easily available, it resulted in the rising debt levels of the developers and real estate companies. So overall, Chinese banks were pouring in billions of dollars in real estate as companies like Evergrande kept borrowing billions of dollars. As the real estate developers' debt and borrowing grew, it created lots of potential for risks. If any of these real estate companies defaulted, it would cause ripple effects across financial institutions, impacting banks, investors, and broader economic stability. Also, China's housing market has seen a significant price rise, particularly in major cities. This was partly attributed to speculative buying because of the perception of real estate as a guaranteed return on investment. Rising property prices were becoming increasingly out of reach for many Chinese citizens, particularly young people. Banks and investors happily threw in money, making a bet on China's growing middle class and its appetite for homes and other properties. The Chinese government, on the other hand, was worried about the Chinese banks' exposure to its real estate sector. Their idea was to reduce Chinese banks' exposure to the real estate sector. Recognizing the unsustainable and debt-fueled growth of their real estate sector, the government introduced the 3 red lines policy in 2020. The policy was primarily aimed at limiting real estate companies' borrowing capacity. The 3 red lines policy had 3 simple rules. Number 1, liability to asset ratio. This limit restricts a developer's total debt to no more than 70% of their total assets. In simpler terms, for every $1 of assets a developer owns, they can have no more than 70 cents in debt. Number 2, net gearing ratio. This measure focused on equity, restricting a developer's net debt to no more than 100% of their shareholder equity. Essentially, for every $1 of shareholder equity, a developer can have no more than $1 of net debt. Number 3, cash to short-term debt ratio. This line ensures liquidity by mandating developers to maintain a cash to short-term debt ratio of at least 1. This means that for every $1 of short-term debt, they must have at least $1 of cash readily available. The rules of this policy applied to all of the Chinese real estate sector. Evergrande defaulted on all 3 rules of this policy. They had more debt than assets. They relied heavily on borrowed money compared to their own investments. They lacked enough cash to cover immediate debts. The model of selling apartments before they were completed gave companies the cash they needed to keep operating. But this new policy made it harder for developers like Evergrande to finish the apartments they have already sold to buyers. How come companies can face issues when they have already sold homes to buyers and have collected cash before they started building? The reason for this is Evergrande's growth strategy. It heavily relied on acquiring land, starting new projects, and expanding rapidly. The pre-sale funds were substantial, but they couldn't keep pace with their ambitious expansion plans. Also, pre-sales typically only covered a portion of construction costs, especially in the early stages. Banks played a role in filling this gap by providing loans for land acquisition, infrastructure development, and construction materials. Evergrande ventured into non-property businesses like electric vehicles and soccer clubs. These ventures, while potentially lucrative, required significant upfront investments, further increasing their borrowing needs. Because of this, it became very difficult for Evergrande to finish the construction of the sold-out apartments. At the moment, they need to deliver as many as 1.6 million properties to homebuyers, and they are about $300 billion in debt. Evergrande now has a market value of less than $300 million, which is much less than its $330 billion of debt. The Chinese court has ordered the liquidation of Evergrande, and since then, the stock price of Evergrande is down 99% from its 2020 high. Evergrande owns assets worth $245 billion. However, the company owes about $300 billion, a big shortfall, and there will be a clear order of priority when it comes to repayments. Foreign investors who invested in Evergrande will most likely lose all of their investments, because the Chinese government will prioritize maintaining social and political stability on their home turf. So they'll protect investors at home first and try to ensure that people who have paid for Evergrande's properties eventually get their homes. Overall, the Evergrande has become a headache for the Chinese government. The collapse of Evergrande will ripple across the Chinese economy. Companies like Evergrande are so large and so entangled in China's financial system that their failure can have a huge impact on the country's economy. These real estate companies are an important driver of steel consumption, loan growth, and jobs for sales agents and construction workers. They create lots of jobs, and many industries run because of the real estate industry. Also, the slowdown in real estate hurts ordinary Chinese people because they tend to invest a huge part of their savings in real estate. Another potential impact of Evergrande's failure will be on China's financial system. Because of Evergrande's collapse, banks and other lenders may be forced to lend less. This could lead to what is known as a credit crunch, where companies struggle to borrow money at affordable rates. A credit crunch would be very bad news for the world's second-largest economy because companies that can't borrow find it difficult to grow and, in some cases, are unable to continue operating. This may also drive away foreign investors, who could see China as a less attractive place to put their money. So, overall, the Evergrande will have a huge impact on China. Now, the real question is this similar to the 2008 crisis, and will it affect the world? During the 2008 crisis, all of the world's money was invested in mortgage-backed securities because Wall Street sold them as safe investments. The Lehman Brothers collapsed and had a debt of about $613 billion. The Evergrande has a debt of about $300 billion. So even if Evergrande fails, it is less likely that it will cause a recession like 2008, as it is more involved with China and less with the rest of the world. At most, we can see the slowdown in the Chinese economy after the collapse of Evergrande. This slowdown will give an opportunity to emerging economies like India, and it may lead to many of the production businesses in China moving to India. But it is nowhere near the point where it will cause a crisis like 2008. Debt is money, but only if you manage it well. Otherwise, reckless borrowing will always lead to disaster. The 2008 financial crash was solely the outcome of reckless borrowing and bad debt. Watch this playlist to learn more about the 2008 crash and subscribe to the channel for more such content.